and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Hello, and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we're coming at you live like every Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Dark Matter Radio Network. If you're listening live, please join us in the chat room at podcastufo.com. We have another great one for you tonight. Alejandro Rojas of Open Minds will be coming up with the news in a few. Tonight we have a guest. His name is Paul Carr, and you haven't heard of him before because Paul is a space engineer who commented on our Podcast UFO Facebook page, and it was real intriguing, and so I contacted him, and he said yes, he would be a guest, and I think that you will find this very interesting. For the next 2 weeks, I am going on hiatus, which actually forces Alejandro Rojas to go on hiatus too. So we have a fill-in host. Longtime listeners will know him as our past co-host, Michael Lauk. Great host, and I'm sure he'll do a great job. And he has two killer guests, one I'm going to be talking about in just a minute, Stanton Friedman next week. And the week after that, he has Whitley Strieber on. And I'm almost jealous of that because I've tried to get Whitley on for quite a while. So he agreed to be on to talk about his new book. And, hey, how you doing, Alejandro?
I am doing great. How are you?
Good, good. You know, before we get into the news, I wanted to talk to you about the Exeter UFO Festival I went to last week. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, how is that? It's so interesting that in the last few years, a few of these festivals have popped up, and I think because Roswell has gotten so much attention every year, and they all seem to be doing very well.
Yeah, this one's been around a long time, but it really had quite a huge attendance. It's one of the ones that are free, and you know, there was lots and lots of people.
I can afford that.
You know, Ryan Mullahy talked me into coming, and he arranged. Ryan Mullahy's a past guest here. He arranged a table. I was sitting right between Richard Dolan and Stan Friedman, and Stan is looking great. He's doing great. And
cool. That's good to hear.
Yeah, he looks really good. I mean, he lost a little weight. He's looking great. And if you look on my website, you'll see a picture that I took of these two young maidens that went up and sat beside him. And he's got a big smile on his face. And Kathy Martin was there in the same room. And I got to tell you, Richard Dolan is doing this sort of sophisticated hippie look. And I'm telling you, it's working. It works.
You like it?
Yeah. And the women were clamoring, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Contact in the Desert, he had it. He was full-on hippie, though. And there was a lot of controversy over thumbs up or thumbs down. And I say, what the heck, man?
Hey, he looks comfortable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a really good turnout and a lot of fun. It was awesome. So anyway, what's going on for the news?
Ooh, lots of news going on. So I guess the first story I want to talk about has to do with the Napa Valley earthquake. And it's kind of interesting just because it's an example of, this fighting of different phenomena that goes inside the science community. So there is something called earthquake lights, right. And it's just theorized, and because people report seeing flashes of lights during earthquakes, and there's a number of these over time, and we've got a video on this story about this on our site. But there's a scientist who works for SETI at the Mountain View in California, and he says these are earthquake lights. They've done some experiments to show that this is what's going on. They often get reported as UFOs, which was the case in this Napa Valley incident as well. But what's interesting is that there are other scientists who say, no, there is no such thing as earthquake lights. So it's this struggle, and, the story goes, follows this scientist who, has been working on this for decades, talking about these earthquake lights. You have, in this case, with social media being so prevalent, a lot of people tweeting, hey, I saw these flashes of lights, and people then responding to those tweets saying, oh, I wasn't crazy, I saw flashes of lights too. Other researchers say that perhaps these are due to electrical issues, the transformers exploding and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a highly contended and debated issue that often gets, blamed for or called UFOs. But what's interesting is some scientists are saying, well, it still remains a UFO because it's not an earthquake light because those don't exist. So kind of interesting story.
Yeah. Now, I've actually seen a transformer blow up before, and it was the brightest light I've ever seen. But I've heard about earthquake lights, and I think there really is such a phenomena. And hopefully they'll, it's not quite as evasive as UFOs because it's seen every time, or not every time, but a lot of times when there's an earthquake, people see it. So I don't see why science doesn't take a look at that.
Right, and there was a study done recently, and I referred to this, where they kind of mirrored the conditions of an earthquake, and they did find an electrical charge in the ground due to the friction, I guess, which lends some credibility to the possibility of earthquake lights. So really interesting to see the science debating like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I say earthquake lights, thumbs up. Yes, they most likely
they exist.
Yeah.
Along with Bigfoot, they're out there.
That's right. Someone's seeing something. Yeah.
So a couple sightings, too, I wanted to talk about that are debated as to whether they've been solved or not. So this is kind of cool. So one of these is a UFO photo captured over Cinnamon Brow in England. I love cinnamon, so this one is particularly interesting to me. But this website, This Is Cheshire, received a photo from a witness who said that he saw this object. There were actually 5 of them he saw at one time, but he only got one of them on camera. He said he used his super zoom camera, and you have this weird shaped object in the sky. Some great pictures. Well, I looked in the comments, trying to do some research as to what this might have been. Of course, people said weather balloons, things such as this. But one lady said it's a dummy-shaped balloon. And I'm thinking, are they talking about a politician or something like that? But no, in England, I guess they call pacifiers, babies' pacifiers, dummies. And so I looked this up, and sure enough, for baby showers and things, there are these pacifier-shaped balloons, and I got a picture of one which is fairly similar, so that's what it could be, but some pretty striking photos, so people will have to take a look there and see what they think themselves.
Yeah, that's a funny one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dummy balloons.
Who would have thunk?
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I was thinking. I'm like, yeah, right, a dummy balloon. But it was similar. And another one that I'm sure people are going to hear about because this is brand new today. Fox 2 in St. Louis, Missouri was taking some video of a lightning storm and something zipped past the camera. So it's hot news, UFO seen on video for this news site. But a couple of the producers took a look, and they zoomed in, and they feel that it is a bird that was zooming across the screen and was illuminated by the lightning. I tend to agree with that, but I'm sure there will be people contesting that analysis out there and saying, hey, you guys are just debunking these extraterrestrial craft again. So, yeah, people take a look at this one. This is another one that comes with some cool video.
And by the way, all these can be found on Open Minds, or you can go to our website, our homepage, and right in the show notes, there'll be links to these directly to the stories.
Yeah.
And the bird thing, this is something that Mark D'Antonio talks about from MUFON, that a lot of times this happens. People don't expect to see a bird after they take the video, but they don't even notice it while they're taking the video.
Yeah, exactly. That happens a lot. So, and I did want to cover one more that isn't debunked yet.
Okay, good.
So this is cool. I know. I tried to get in some good ones there. And this is a UFOs caught on video over Skyros Island in Greece. So this is exciting. So a beautiful place in Greece. And the video isn't that impressive. It's a couple of lights kind of blinking in the sky. But that's all they were able to capture. But this witness says he, along with 20 other people at a bar on the beach, saw these 5 objects kind of flying around in parallel, and suddenly they moved towards each other and then sped off at what he called breakneck speed off into the distance. So this is kind of an exciting one. And if, what the witnesses say is what really happened, that's pretty impressive and an astonishing sighting there.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to come clean. Really, for the next 2 weeks, I'm actually going over there to investigate that. So.
Excellent. Yeah, I want to come with then. That's a good idea.
Yeah, well, hey, you're not going to be on the show anyway, so, hey, pack your bags. We're
Let's
going.
go.
So is that it for the news this week?
That's it for the news. Of course, there's always tons of news going on, but you can find these all at openminds.tv. Those are just some of the highlights of the week.
Great. And we'll be talking to you in, 3 weeks?
Yeah, so you have a fun trip out there in Greece, and be careful.
I will. All right. Have a happy hiatus. And so that's it for the news today. And coming up right after the short music break is Paul Carr. Stay tuned. Paul Carr, how are you?
Fine, Marty. How are you?
I'm doing well. And for the listening audience, I want you to, if you would, give your background first. And we're going to be talking about UFOs and your podcast, your great podcast that I just listened to. I want to talk a little bit about that. But can you give your background and what you're doing currently as far as your occupation, and then we can go into the investigations after that.
Sure. Let me preface, though, by saying I do not speak for NASA.
Are you there? Looks like we lost Paul. NASA got him. That's what it was. That was like perfect timing. As soon as he said he was not affiliated with NASA, he vanished. And we're trying to get him back on right now. He's got a great podcast. And I'm just going to play a little clip since we have this moment of issues here. This is a podcast he did with a skeptic. And I'll play a little clip of it. And the skeptic was very interesting because he was a very healthy skeptic. So here's a little clip of that, and I'm going to try to get Paul on while this plays.
How you could see that even so, given the right kinds of structures of prestige and authority and control and hierarchy, that once sort of the word came down from on high, from Harvard and other elite institutions and scientists, that everyone would fall into place. I think that's part of the puzzle of what we're dealing with here too.
Can we talk more about your 170? I think we agree that the UFO culture, the UFO subculture, is full of lots of stuff that's highly questionable.
Yeah.
All right, so that was a clip. Paul, you're back on.
I'm back on. I dropped off for some reason.
Yeah, well, don't do that again. I think it was when you mentioned NASA.
Oh, yes. Well, of course they are listening.
Yeah. Well, it was actually the exact same time you said that about NASA. You just left.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, one thing about people think about NASA, they think it's some sort of dark government agency. The vast majority of people at NASA are, hippies. They're scientists and people who support science, and it's a pretty open culture.
Yeah, I had off air. I had a conversation with Ray Stanford, who his wife works at Goddard, and he actually hangs out a lot with people from the Space Center there, and basically said the same thing. There's a lot of really interesting people, faceted in many different interests, and great stuff.
Yeah, Ray's an interesting guy. I'd love to have a chat with him myself. But anyway, I was. Where did you lose me? I was talking about how
I wanted to know basically your background, and
right.
If you could talk about your career first, and then we'll get into you actually investigate UFOs, which I think is pretty awesome.
Well, for over 30 years, I've been in the design, build, test, operation of unmanned spacecraft. I was inspired by the manned space program when I was just a kid. And I decided fairly early on, I'm a space guy. Space is what I do. And I've been doing it since the early 80s. And I've always been interested in UFOs, although that interest has waxed and waned, and because for a long time I was turned off, like so many other people, by the UFO culture.
Mm-hmm. More or less the fringe aspect of it?
Yeah. The fringe aspect, and also the fact that it has very low respectability in the more, mainstream technical culture. It's sort of what we call the laughter curtain. I'm sure you're familiar with the notion that it's all sort of acquired a kind of joke atmosphere, and people don't take UFOs seriously, and people who are interested in UFOs, they don't take them seriously. So if you're interested, you generally keep your mouth shut. But like I said, I've been doing it 30 years.
Does that go for you for the most part, or do you openly talk about it?
I don't talk about it much at work.
Now, let me just ask you this. So, but do you talk about it with certain people that you feel comfortable with at work? I mean, are there those people there?
They're there, but the subject doesn't come up much. Mm-hmm. UFO believers generally regard me as a skeptic, and I'm happy to accept that label. And yet I investigate UFOs. I think there's something about UFOs that is important and interesting. And I've not made any effort to conceal the fact that I do that. Like I said, I've been doing this 30 years. I'm senior enough that I'm not worried about my climbing up the ladder. Mm-hmm. That's being affected by ridicule or people thinking that I can't be taken seriously. I think I've shown that I can be. So I don't worry about that anymore. There was a time when I would have said, hey, wait, I better, if I want to move up to the next level in this business, I'm going to have to keep my mouth shut about UFOs. And so I did that. And there was also a period of time where I really just was so turned off. I didn't really want to. I would prefer to just accept the default position that there was nothing to it and just move on. That changed, but I was prepared to just take that position. I think a lot of people they take the comforting notion that there's nothing to it, and you can easily take that position. Mm-hmm. And my skeptical friends who say, I don't have to believe in UFOs, I will tell them, you're right, you don't have to. We don't have enough evidence for anything as strong as belief. And what we do have evidence for, or not even evidence, but we have intriguing hints that there's something out there that's not exactly in line with how we think of the world, the planet Earth. And I can't prove it to you. I can't give you an ironclad case that has no holes in it that says, yes, there's something out there that doesn't fit into the standard model of reality. But I think there may be. And if there is, it's incredibly important. And
well, there you go. I agree with that. Now, a man of science such as yourself, the first thing that comes to mind is, what would you do, or what do you think could be done to better investigate what's going on?
Oh, boy. Well, there's really three major aspects of that. And this is one of the reasons I joined up with Antonio Paris, because I think he's on board with this too, is one thing we have to do is we have to drain the swamp. We have to remove the toxicity from the topic. We have to create a safe place where reasonable people can investigate, study, compare notes, and not feel that they're part of the lunatic fringe. And right now that is still in progress. I think we're not there yet. I see encouraging signs that is happening. That there are real people of science who are rational and skeptical, who are willing to open themselves up to discussions about unidentified aerial phenomena. It doesn't have to be treated like the standard woo-woo topic. Mm-hmm. It's not the same thing as astrology. It's not the same thing as homeopathy. There's
right.
There's a lot of there's a small space there that we can create, and I think a lot of that has to be done out of public view. And then, if we drain the swamp, we gradually remove the toxicity. The next step is to gain respect. Mm-hmm. And how do we do that? Well, that's a very tough problem, and I'm still working on it. I hope lots of other people will join me and help me work on it. We have to do good scientific work.
I agree. I'm 100% with you. I want to just throw a quote at you that I had an astrophysicist on a few weeks ago, Jeffrey Bennett.
Yeah, I heard it. I heard that was a good episode. Yeah.
Thanks for listening. The part that fascinated me, and I'll try to paraphrase it the best I can, but he said if an intelligence society can get through the bottleneck of their technology without blowing themselves up, one of the things that they would be doing is trying to figure out space travel, and they probably are. What are your thoughts about that?
I generally agree with that. I mean, I don't. It's possible that a species could be very advanced and sophisticated and completely ignore the universe around them, but it's hard to imagine a sophisticated society, just from the human analogy, which I know is imperfect and probably fraught with error. Astronomy has always been an incredibly important part of advanced civilization on our planet. Mm-hmm. Even, just about every civilization has gotten smart about astronomy, gotten really good. The ancient Chinese, the ancient Mayans, the Egyptians. So far from ignoring the universe, we're extremely interested in it. And so, it's there. It's the elephant in the room. You have to go. You have to see. And frankly, I think we are doing that, even though my generation are all very disappointed in the manned space program as it's evolved since the 1960s. But our unmanned space program has been a huge success. Mm-hmm. And we know so much more about the universe than we did when I was a kid.
Right. And who knows, if it's possible, let's say, that we are being visited, who knows if they're manned or unmanned? That could be part of... Go ahead.
One of the things that I'm taking quite seriously is that they're unmanned. That it wouldn't make sense necessarily to send biological beings across such vast distances.
I had this conversation with my son last weekend. We were vacationing. And, he basically said the same thing you just did. And I came back with him, unless they can figure out how to travel space instantly and want to experience it themselves like we would.
Well, yeah. I mean, all bets are off if you can do that.
Right.
And as far as we know, that's not possible. But, again, as far as we know. One thing that I've always been a big... that I push really hard in my blog and my podcast and everything is humility. There's a lot we don't know, and we have to avoid the trap of jumping to conclusions about anything having to do with an advanced civilization. Any civilization that's out there and is currently existing and functioning is almost certainly far more advanced than we are.
Right. Hey, I have to say that, first of all, we're talking with Paul Carr. And if you're listening live, you can jump over to podcastufo.com and get in our chat room. We do have a number of questions that have been popping in our chat room, and I'm going to start at the top. What was it that caused you to go from a non-believer to a person who leaned toward the other side?
Well, let me say that I went I don't think I'm a believer.
That term might be used a little too loosely in this subject.
Yeah, I think the whole discussion about belief is something I'd like to not have, but we should be talking about evidence, and we should be talking about science, and that's not about belief. That's about science changes all the time, and the proper skeptical attitude is I may be wrong. And that's always been my attitude with respect to UFOs. Even going back to the 60s when I first saw the news stories about the UFO flaps that we're having back then, and how Congressman Ford, who eventually became President Ford, was demanding that Congress investigate, or that somebody investigate. And my first UFO sighting, which was in the 70s, which left me puzzled. I didn't have a good explanation for it, but I always kept telling myself, I could be wrong. It could be something really weird, or it could be something that I just hadn't thought of. And that's still my position. I could be wrong. But what I have seen things in the sky myself that I think are strange. I've seen and talked to many credible people who have similar experiences. I'm not that impressed by most of the famous cases, the Roswells and the Rendleshams and so on. But it's just the weight of many credible people seeing incredible things, many of which I know from my experience as a field investigator you can explain, but there's always that hard nugget that is probably the inspiration behind the false sightings, and is we have good evidence, multiple witnesses, and you don't have an explanation. Those kinds of cases are rare. They are probably well less than 5% of the raw reports. But I've always thought, there's hints here that something is going on, and there is absolutely no reason logically why we might not be visited by robots or probes or something from other planets. So if there is something, a non-human intelligence, and let's face it, we're completely ignorant about the nature of such a thing, then that is the most important discovery ever.
I agree, and that's why I just wish more people could take it on the serious side, but I do also understand what you were saying about trying to separate the wheat from the chaff, as they say. We have a ton of questions coming in, and I want to get to.
Okay.
I want to get to some of these.
Keep me on track.
Yeah. Okay. This person was asking. He's curious if you investigated the Black Knight satellite, and I believe you did, didn't you?
I did briefly. I'm not a Black Knight expert, but I spoke to Duncan Lunan, who was the guy who was misquoted originally about the Black Knight satellite by the Daily Mail. Whoever heard of them make get anything wrong. But
okay.
Actually, Duncan Lunan, he told me, he said this is one of the worst things he's ever seen the Daily Mail get wrong, which is that makes it really egregious. But yeah, there's I have not found any evidence that the Black Knight exists at all. And
I'm going to be honest with you. I have absolutely no idea what it means. So we can, I just haven't looked into it or haven't heard about it, but that doesn't really mean much.
Well, Duncan's an interesting guy. You might want to get him on sometime. He's got some good stories to tell. But he was looking into the possibility that there are alien probes in our solar system, and he had some intriguing evidence of that.
Oh, wow.
But this thing just became an urban legend. It took off, and I do have on wowsignalpodcast.com there is an MP3 where Duncan explains all that and how it got started. There's none of the photographs you've seen that say this is the Black Knight are anything. And there's. The notion was it was a 13,000 or a 25,000-year-old satellite that was in orbit around the Earth. And frankly, I don't think that would be really cool. That's called a Bracewell probe. It is something that even mainstream scientists take seriously as a possibility, but as a possibility.
Right.
They don't know, and I don't know of any evidence of such a thing. I'm really interested in how we could look for that evidence, and that's one of the things I talk about on the Wow Signal quite often.
And I've mentioned this a bunch of times, that it doesn't matter if it's 25,000 years old or 1 million years old. Anything could, if something was traveling in their prime, they could definitely come here then. I'm going to bounce around a little bit on the message board on questions, and here's one. Phil is asking, how can science be applied to transient phenomena? Doesn't make sense to me.
That's a very good question. And it's something that comes up frequently, but there are many examples of science dealing with transient phenomena. UFOs are particularly tricky transient phenomena because they don't repeat. You can't chase UFOs. I think that's been well established. You can wait. You can sit and wait for them, and maybe they'll come by. That's something that I think we need to do more of. But they are transient. We have to study them in a different way. We have to study the patterns of reports, and not sit there and hope that the black triangle you saw yesterday is going to come back by the same place. It's almost certainly not going to come back by the same place. It may, in fact, that same particular triangle may never be seen again anywhere. But keep in mind, there's two things. One is we have only a tiny fraction of UFO sightings are reported.
Right, and I just if we can pause there, I want to do a case in point here. I was at a UFO festival this last weekend, and Richard Dolan was speaking, and he asked the audience, which was a very well-attended audience, like almost standing room, and he said, how many people believe that they saw a unidentified flying object, a UFO? And, it looked like about 70% of the audience raised their hand. I was shocked at that. And then he said, how many people reported it? And I got to tell you, there was less than 10 hands up.
Yeah. And by the way, my organization will take your report. Lots of organizations will take your report. People should report things to organizations that will investigate at least the better cases. But even if they don't investigate, it's good to have that database. Right. So the answer on transient phenomena is it's largely an unsolved problem with respect to UFOs. But if you look at other transient phenomena that science has discovered, they've found ways to investigate them. A very good example are the gamma ray bursts that showed up in the 60s by accident. Nobody expected to find them. Mm-hmm. They were looking for Soviet nuclear tests, not for astronomical phenomena. And it took many, many years to determine what they were. And I don't think they've still exactly got consensus on on what all gamma ray bursts are. There seem to be different classes of them, but that was a transient phenomena that appeared only for a short time, went away, and that didn't reoccur at that same point. But it reoccurred often enough that they were able to send up satellites to study it. And so they found a way. And because it was scientifically important enough, they found a way. That's part of the big problem here is we don't have not only do we not have the money, we don't have the talent that we really need to scientifically study UFOs. And that's something that, and because it's a career-limiting move for a young scientist to say, hey, I'd like to spend my weekends out looking for UFOs. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Do it quietly. Up on the message board, this is sort of like a speculation, I think. I'm not sure of the authenticity of the NASA feed that was shut off as a craft of some kind approached the International Space Station.
I have to tell you, I don't know much about that. I hear that kind of thing all the time. Now, you remember the connection from the International Space Station to the ground is usually through TDRS. And so every orbit, they have to switch from one TDRS satellite to another. So there is going to be an interruption in communications. So that's not at all extraordinary. But in terms of something approaching the space station, I haven't seen any evidence that it could be. I have to plead ignorance.
Yes, I actually spoke to a few different times to one of the people that landed on the moon, Alan Bean, and Alan Bean was involved in a quite a interesting UFO sighting back in 1970, I believe it was. But I couldn't get him to talk about it. But it's all over the internet. He just would not talk about it on the show.
But, do you mean the Skylab 3?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That is a great case.
Yeah.
And it has been incorrectly debunked in my view. So when I get some time, I'm really going to dig into that. But I think there you have 3 astronauts, you have photographs, you have measurements. Great case. It's potentially really. I mean, you can always come up with a hand-waving explanation for anything, but a solid explanation that really fits all the facts. Right now, I don't think they have one.
Right. Getting back to the message board, what evidence caused you? No, wait a minute. I think I already asked that question. I'm sorry. Someone is curious if you or any of your coworkers are bound to restrictions. You sort of covered that regarding sensitive information related to the world of national security.
Well, at NASA, I run into very little classified information of any sort. But we do have something called sensitive but unclassified, and also something called for official use only. That's not used frequently at NASA. NASA people generally, the culture there is to avoid unnecessary restrictions on the flow of information because it's the mission is scientific, and science works best when everybody has access to information. There's also something called ITAR, which means that we can't discuss technical information that might go to foreign nationals unless we have some kind of special agreement in place. So, there are restrictions, but no, there's not like security cops at NASA who come and tell us, don't talk about science, don't talk about space. They don't talk about specific things that could be a problem if some malicious person knew them. And believe me, I've not seen anything that I thought was inappropriate or a gag order of something on some kind. NASA, like I said, I don't speak for NASA, but I think NASA does not really. NASA is a much more open culture than the national security bureaucracy.
Now, we talk about evidence. You've been talking about the lack of evidence. Someone on the message board wants to know what the most compelling evidence for you is.
Well, I wish I could tell you that I had rock solid evidence of something. But when we ask about evidence, we have to ask, what is it evidence of, right? And that turns out to be a hard problem, and I think a largely unsolved problem. And if you, I contribute something to a podcast called API Case Files called Unidentified Science. I would refer to them to that because I've been wrestling with that problem, unidentified science, for 5 episodes now. But essentially, for me personally, the most compelling data, I don't want to say evidence, was my own personal experiences.
Right.
But
how this is a really good point. You said you had a sighting back in the 70s. How do you relay that to someone? And I'm going to ask you kind of a silly question. Did you report that?
No, I am going to admit that I did everything wrong with respect to every sighting I've had.
Same here, yeah. So I understand.
Which is one of the reasons I wanted to become a field investigator. I felt I wanted to help get it done right, and figure out what right would be. The last time I saw something that I didn't understand, I tried to document it. Turned out I could explain it eventually. It took me a few months, but it was. There are other things I've seen that I cannot explain, and I'm open to trying to figure it out. But I'm not saying that it's proof of aliens. I will never say that unless I have actual proof of aliens. But and the word proof is extremely strong. That means it's logically unavoidable. I would say evidence. But I've also worked some cases personally as a field investigator that have, when you get up close and personal with those cases, you end up scratching your head sometimes. You say, well, yeah, there's possibly some other explanation, but everything I'm seeing so far looks pretty anomalous, pretty weird. I don't know why it's anomalous, but it doesn't fit anything I know about. And I'm working right now a series of things that have taken place in north central Maryland, not far from Camp David, by the way, which I don't understand. We have one source O photograph. We have witness testimony from actually multiple events spread out over time. That area is full of classified facilities and government activity, so stay tuned. I really don't know the answer, but it's quite interesting.
Would you say that's one of the most compelling cases that you've studied so far?
Yes. In terms of historical cases, I think the Skylab 3 case is a great case. I think that the Belgium wave is a great case.
Same here, yeah.
Now, recently somebody came out to poison that by saying, "Oh, look, the one photograph you have is tainted, possibly even faked." And to that, I'd say, "Well, yeah, but that's really not a key piece of evidence for the Belgium wave at all." But I wonder. I have this. I think it's quite mysterious why we don't have more and better photographs. For example, the O'Hare case would have been a fantastic case if just somebody had snapped it with their cell phone and then uploaded that, to Flickr.
Yeah, I'm not sure that. What year was that? I'm just trying to remember what type of.
I think it was 2007.
Yeah, so there were camera phones, but not like there are today. Just a comment. It's a comment that, and I hope you don't take this. I hope you don't get upset by it. But someone is saying, I see a double standard. His personal experiences are okay, but people like Charles Halt, that's of Rendlesham Forest, do not impress him.
Well, okay, I'm offering my personal experiences as to why I personally am compelled. Mm-hmm. I am not offering them as evidence. There's a difference.
Okay.
My personal experience are not evidence of anything partly because I failed to document them well, but also it was just one witness. I could be remembering it wrong. There's lots of things here. To me personally, it's compelling. It makes me want to go search and learn more.
That's what it did with me as well. Here's another question up here. Someone wants me to ask you about 1991 VG. Do you know? Yeah,
I do know about that. And I believe that's coming back by the Earth in a couple of years. I can't remember. I'm going on memory there. I may be wrong about that, but it was a small body that was detected, flew by the Earth, and at least one scientist speculated it might be a Bracewell probe, which would be a probe sent from another civilization to sort of keep an eye on us, and maybe possibly, the classic Bracewell paper stated that the Bracewell probes would keep an eye on us till we reach a certain level of advancement and then sort of let us in on the secret.
And then blow us up.
Who they were. No.
Okay, that's good. All right. Have you done any research into the Apollo 20 mission and the Mona Lisa?
I'm not sure what the Mona Lisa is. I did, years ago, I looked at some claims about an Apollo 20, which I found to be bogus. Again, I'm going on memory here. There were major problems with the video that was making the rounds at the time, but I really don't believe there was an Apollo 20.
Okay, all right, and I'm just burning through these pretty quickly, and Marcus is saying, in academia, the use of peer review is useful to validate, et cetera. Could peer review be established in the UFO research community, and would it lend more credibility to the UFO field of research?
Yes, absolutely. And to make that happen, we've got to start sharing data between investigative bodies in a way that is ethical with respect to the witnesses. Now, it's a bit of a trick to do that because you have to anonymize the data, but I think that's that is something we definitely ought to be working towards, and I agree that peer review of cases would help a lot in bringing the quality cases up to the top. Right.
Now I want to talk to you a little bit about debunkers. There's pseudoscience, but there's also pseudo-skeptics who go way to the other extreme. And I want to – do you think it's oftentimes I feel that cases like this occur because of fear issues or possibly ego issues? What do you think about the average debunker?
Well, I'm a very poor psychologist, but here's my rule of thumb, okay? Everyone should be skeptical. You should be skeptical. I should be skeptical. We should all be skeptical. Nobody should swallow anything whole, whatever claim is being made. However, you should be skeptical of yourself first. I think that Richard Feynman said something like that. The easiest person to fool is yourself. So if you run into somebody who is skeptical of other people but not of themselves, I think you could move on from there. You can turn that person off, that voice off. If they seem to be desperate to disprove something and are grasping at straws to do it, then they're defending a dogmatic position. That's not skepticism. Skepticism is taking the evidence where it leads you. Mm-hmm. And really asking hard questions about the evidence and hard questions about what it really means and reasoning carefully. It's just really just being a good scientist. So if you see people dead set to disprove something or prove something, I think that you need not waste your time with that person anymore. Don't get upset about what they say. Just move on. I accept the label of skeptic. But when I do that, I say skeptic does not mean debunker. Skeptic means investigator. It means curiosity and respect for the witness, respect for the case. If the investigation shows clearly that it is bunk, then debunk it, and debunk it with energy and enthusiasm. If you find someone to be a scam artist, tell the world that they're a scam artist. But you better have a rock solid case that's so.
I've actually done that a few times on this podcast, and I haven't really had any repercussions from it yet. But and I agree, and I also agree with your skeptic view, because I think it's Stan Friedman that said, if your mind is too open, then your brain is going to fall out. You have to observe, but also observe with caution, and try to find the reason instead of just buying into the whole thing.
Yeah, well, a skeptic will being a skeptic doesn't make you a superior person. It doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to be right. Mm-hmm. In fact, the first thing a skeptic says is, I could be wrong. Right. So,
a true skeptic, yes.
Yeah. So what it might make you is a little bit less deluded and biased than you might have been otherwise. And we all have delusions. We all have biases. We all have little narratives that we tell ourselves that may or may not quite square with an objective examination of the facts. And even the most rabid debunker has those biases. We need to be kind to each other. We need to treat each other with a little respect and try to move forward. There are some people who just generally, who really are not going to be part of a solution, for one reason or another. But, you kind of have to gently identify those people and move on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I did have a skeptic that was on the show that we more or less debated a little bit, and he is part of what's called I
think I know what you're talking about.
Evan Bernstein.
Evan Bernstein.
Yeah, and they seem in general, he seems like a proud person to be proud that he knows more than anyone else in this field looking into it.
Yeah,
I wouldn't call him a true skeptic all the way through. I'd call him a partial skeptic and more toward a debunker as well.
Yeah, I think he's on a podcast with Stephen Novella.
Right.
I think Stephen Novella has done some wonderful work in the alternative medicine field and really debunking some very dangerous nonsense.
Yes, I know. I've listened to that show, and I agree. He's a doctor, right?
Yeah, he's a neurologist at Yale. Mm-hmm. He's the real deal. And so, like I said, let's be kind. Let's recognize that skeptics often do good work. And right now, the skeptic community is torn apart by some controversies that you would not believe that they're having. I don't know if you've been following that or not, but it's getting really ugly. Actually, it has been ugly for quite a while. It's kind of sad. And there are good people there. And there are people that, when we can get to the point where we can drain the swamp of ufology, they will come over and listen to us. I'm not sure they'll agree, but they'll listen, and they maybe contribute. So, because what we're dealing with here is something for which we have no scientific paradigm. We don't have the usual sort of academic discipline. It's wide open, and we need the smartest people we can get to contribute.
Agreed. Now, can you give the listening audience your blog and all that information, please?
Sure. Well, I have a blog called Dream of the Open Channel, and it's at disownsky.blogspot.com. There's a link to it at my podcast webpage, which is Wow Signal Podcast.
I like that.
.com. And I'm also a member of Aerial Phenomena Investigations, which is aerial-phenomenon.org. And you can go there to report a UFO, or you can, if you're interested in becoming a field investigator, we don't have a lot of slots, but we'd be interested in talking to people who are really highly motivated and kind of get it. You know, we'll have to talk to you before we can decide if you fit in. But there's no pay, but there's also no dues. So,
yep. All right. Well, thanks so much.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Same here. Well, that's it for the show today. If you missed any part of the show, you can catch it as a podcast and a whole bunch of other free podcasts on our website, which is podcastufo.com. You can also check us check out our show notes, our links to all the stories we talked about today. And next week, our guest will be Stan Friedman and with host Michael Lauk. And I want to thank everyone for helping out with the show today. Of course, our guest, Paul Carr, Keith Rowland for producing the Dark Matter Radio Network, Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse for music, Peggy Shunning for managing our Facebook page. And remember to like us on Facebook for all the latest UFO news. You can check us out next week right here on the Dark Matter Radio Network and at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And don't forget to jump in the chat room. This is Martin Willis, and signing off.